Hi, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here and to chat a little bit about Undo and also specifically about the challenges that face project developers with new methodologies, which is a big and hot topic at the moment. So thanks for joining. We'll get started just quickly. If you could provide a little bit of an introduction about who you are and a bit about Undo as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. It's great to see you again. So my name is Simon Manley. I'm the head of carbon for Undo. We're a project developer and we specialize specifically in enhanced rock weathering as a project type that removes carbon from the atmosphere, carbon removal technology. My personal background is that I come out of a background mainly in biochar and now moved into a more sort of general sort of carbon role. And for Undo, my role and the role of my team is to ensure that all of our project activities on the ground transition successfully into, we'll go through the right certification pathways to ensure that we are generating high value, high integrity, future-proof carbon credits for sale on the voluntary carbon market.
Perfect. Very, very concise. We would love to dive in a little bit more on what that all looks like and what that process is. But first, can you just give a little bit more of an explanation for folks who maybe don't know what enhanced rock weathering is?
Yeah, sure. So enhanced rock weathering sits within a sort of family of what is described as long-lived carbon storage or carbon removal solutions. If you were to look at the Oxford Principles for Offsetting, or the guidelines I think they're called, you'll see that within sort of the carbon removals category, that there are four project types that sit within this sort of long-lived area, if you like. DACs, BECS, mineralization, and enhanced rock weathering. What enhanced rock weathering does is, as the name suggests, it enhances an existing process. That process is weathering. It's been happening for millennia. It already removes billions of tons from the atmosphere, a billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year naturally. It is a reaction between rainwater, CO2, and certain types of rock, mainly silicate rocks. When the CO2-loaded rainwater hits silicate rocks, kicks off a chemical reaction which converts that CO2 into a carbonate. That carbonate then sits in the soil water, which becomes river water, which becomes ocean water, and eventually that carbon is precipitated onto the ocean floor in the forms of rocks and shells, etc. And as such, it's then locked away for what we call geological time frames, so hundreds of thousands of years. Now, that process is happening anyway. It doesn't need Undo to be involved for that to take place. But we enhance that process or accelerate that chemical reaction by simply increasing the surface area of the rock on which the chemical reaction is taking place. And we do that by taking crushed up rock, so that the reaction is taking place on lots of tiny bits of rock rather than rock on a cliff face. And we spread that rock over land, typically degraded agricultural land, where we can accelerate that chemical process, and at the same time, that rock can add value to soil properties such as increasing nutrient cycling and improving soil structure.
Great, thank you, very clear. And can you explain a little bit for folks, there are obviously lots of different ways of thinking about types of carbon credits out there. You talked a little bit right there about these removal types of credits under the Oxford Principles. Can you just talk very briefly about kind of the distinction between nature-based versus technology credits, which is one type of kind of way of cutting the market, and then also avoidance type credits versus removals. Of course, you're talking about removals here. So just briefly about, for folks who may be new to the market, what those distinctions mean and how we should think about them.
Yeah, sure. So nature-based versus technology-based. Nature-based solutions or project types tend to be, everybody's heard of planting trees. Afforestation is the most obvious one. And then you've got lots of, they're called regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture, so things like no-till or amending sort of industrial agricultural practices to be less sort of carbon productive. So there are lots of nature-based solutions that we'll come on to their characteristics in a second. And then you've got the kind of the technology-based solutions, which is more things like direct air capture, BECS, so biomass for energy with carbon capture and storage, and mineralization. So kind of the more sort of geologically focused carbon removal solutions. Now, there are pros and cons of both. Nature-based solutions tend to be, as the name suggests, the enhancement or acceleration of a natural system. So that naturally has lots of co-benefits, increases in soil health and food productivity and biodiversity, which are very important and can be categorized under the SDGs. However, that carbon removal function tends to be quite unstable. So typically a tree will only store that carbon away for its lifetime, unless you do something with it, of course. And that lifetime can be quite short if we're talking about, an area which is subject to wildfire, so 20 years. As opposed to on the other side, we have our technology solutions or technology-based projects. And here the carbon is removed for very, very long periods of time, well over 1,000 years, possibly even hundreds of thousands of years. So much more meaningful in terms of addressing the issue around climate change, but they tend not to have that many co-benefits. So, a DAX plant, ain't going to do much for biodiversity, but at the same time, is going to lock away that carbon for a very long period of time. Now, personally, I don't really like that distinction. I think we should be looking at durability. In other words, how long does that carbon get removed from the atmosphere from a time perspective? And then if that project can deliver co-benefits, then all the better. That will only increase its value, and those co-benefits need to be categorized and sort of verified with an existing system such as the SDGs. And then moving on to avoidance versus removals. This is super important, and the IPCC has reported, just in the last couple of years, that even if all of the countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement meet their nationally determined contributions, we're still going to be sort of billions of tons short of where we need to be to keep temperatures rise down to that 1.5 or 2 degree increase. So we need to remove some of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and we need to do it very, very quickly. And there's only a handful of project types or technologies that actually do this. The best analogy that I have heard is, if people are wondering, well, are we talking about wind turbines, or are we talking about enhanced weathering or other carbon removal technologies such as tree planting or biochar? Think of the atmosphere as a bathtub, and the bathtub is filling up with water, and something like, and it used to be the case that as the water fills up in the bathtub, to simply turn the tap off was sufficient to address the crisis of climate change. However, and so turning the tap off type project would be something like a wind turbine or photovoltaic cells, which simply avoid the future production of CO2 into the atmosphere. But unfortunately, the tap wasn't turned off sufficiently. The water has continued to rise, the water being the CO2 in the atmosphere, of course, and now we've got too much of it. And so we need to find technologies that don't turn the tap off, but pull the plug out. And there are only a handful of pull your plug out technologies around and acknowledged to perform that function. And these are the carbon removal technologies. And some carbon removal technologies remove carbon for a short period of time, nature-based solutions, and some carbon removal technologies remove carbon for a long period of time, which is these more technology-based solutions.
Yeah, that's a really helpful analogy, I think, to help people understand that really both are needed, and it's the same thing as in many ways mitigation versus adaptation. There is some kind of change already baked in, and so we need to adapt to that change already baked in and figure out how to live in a new warming world, while also trying to prevent further warming from happening. So we talked a little bit about, you've named now several different types of carbon credit methodologies. Can you just define a little bit what a methodology is? I get a lot of questions from folks who come and they say, I have this land, I have these trees, or I have this project type that I think I can do here. How do I actually go about getting carbon credits for the project that I want to build? So what is a methodology?
Sure. So, strictly speaking, what I've been speaking about is project types. In order for a project type, let's say enhanced weathering, that's what we do. In order for a project type in order for you to quantify, measure, report, and verify on the carbon removal that project is delivering, you need a methodology. And a methodology is a document, an approach, a standard, if you like, where in a single place you have a way of, like I said, measuring, monitoring, and reporting the carbon removal that's taking place. So it involves, it has to be underpinned by all of the science that sits behind the actual carbon removal technology itself, and it needs to be independently verified You can't just make one up yourself, or you can try, but it's not going to be credible until an independent organization has validated your approach to be credible, robust, and thorough according to the science that underpins it. And so methodologies exist so that single project types can have an approach to quantification which is independently verified and endorsed and available to all project developers. And so all project developers implementing, let's say, enhanced rock weathering are all using, the available methodologies, of which there will be only a few, a handful, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure. Okay. And for this question around methodology, for you say there will be a small number of enhanced rock weathering methodologies. How are you approaching that from Undo's perspective? And what are the kind of options that project developers have to get approval of a new methodology? If they go out and they say, I have this type of project, there's no methodology already, what can they do? And what are you doing at Undo?
Yeah, firstly, the reason that there will be a number of different methodologies for a single project type speaks to the fact that methodologies tend to be developed by and approved by the individual carbon standards. So, for example, if you take a different project type like biochar, for example, there is a methodology that was developed by Puro and sits on within their sort of methodology portfolio. There is a methodology for biochar which is developed by Vera and sits on within the BCS portfolio. So, the approaches are largely the same. There are a few important and subtle differences to the two, but there you have two effectively sort of acknowledged and endorsed quantification approaches for the same thing, and the same will apply for other better known project types where you'll have methodologies on the gold standard, you'll have another one on the CDM, you'll have another one for the VCS, etc., etc. So there can be more than one methodology for a single project type, but not too many, you hope, otherwise things do get very, very complicated. For a project developer, such as Undo, where we're doing enhanced rock weathering and there is no methodology that currently sits within any of the mainstream carbon standards within their portfolios, then you have a number of different options. You can either partner with a carbon standard. So I was part of a consortium that did this for biochar with the BCS, for example. So we partnered with Vera, they paid for the work. And we then put together the methodology and then they got it independently verified by what's called a validation and verification body, a VVB. Now, you can do that with Vera, you can do that with the gold standard, you can do that with ACR, you can do that with pretty much any of the main sort of voluntary carbon standards. It's expensive, so if you're having to pay for it yourself, you're not going to get any change out of $100,000. And it takes a long time. It can take anything up to 12 to 18 months, so a year or a year and a half. And so the cost and the time it takes to develop a methodology is completely out of line with the urgency that that we need to get stuff done and to address the issues around sort of carbon removal. Another option is to do it yourself, and this is something that we have chosen to do, but to do so using industry standard and strict guidelines. We've chosen the guidelines laid down by ISO 14064. And if you just dig a little bit into any of the mainstream voluntary carbon market standards, you'll see that they all use 14064 as the underpinning guidelines for their standard development as well. So we have developed our own methodology using these guidelines, and then we are now using the same VVBs, the validation and verification bodies, to independently sort of verify that it complies with the guidelines laid down by the ISO. Now, that is much quicker and much cheaper. So, I talked about $100,000 in about 18 months. In this case, it's basically our time that has been sort of the principal investment. And then in terms of timing, the methodology was drafted in 3 months and the validation process takes about 8 weeks. So it's much, much, much quicker. However, what you don't have is the endorsement of a mainstream CROA-backed standard at this stage.
Right, and so for projects that are in a situation like what Undo was in, what are kind of the key trade-offs that you have to think about from a business perspective? in choosing to go a route that's going to take longer and be with one of the existing standards versus this sort of quicker pathway. And what is I think there's some relevance around sort of frontier technologies, very new technologies in this regard, and those might be different considerations if you're working with a very new technology like you are.
So there's a number of different factors at play here. First of all, what will the market accept? So once you've got your methodology, let's say in our case, we've got our methodology done compliant with ISO 14064 and validated by a VBB, what happens next? Who's willing to accept that? So if you think of your sort of target market for credit, it organized in sort of concentric circles. In the sort of the inner circle, you have a group of organizations. You mentioned Frontier being sort of there is a group of organizations that Shopify, Microsoft, Stripes of this world, all of whom have incredibly well organized and extremely knowledgeable sort of science teams who can look at your approach to quantification, MRV, eligibility, leakage, additionality, etc., all of the kind of characteristics of the methodology, and decide for themselves as to whether what you're doing sort of passes muster or not, and therefore will or will not purchase based on their own sort of due diligence process. Now, not all organizations do that, and so as you move out to the next concentric circle out, so organizations who need credits for offsetting purposes, they're going to lean much more heavily on the kind of the better known standards, gold standard or Vera, etc. Therefore, you are going to need to get your methodology approved by one of those sort of better known standards, and to generate credits again that sit within on their registries in order to sell to that that next sort of group out of particular organizations. And so, that speaks to our strategy, which is, we are currently selling to the inner circle, so to speak, and in order to move out to that next level out, we will be partnering with an ACROA-backed standard, and we're currently making our mind up as to whether that should be the ACR or Vera or gold standard.
Great. Yeah, and I think the obvious piece about that inner circle, as you described it, is that that's not the most scalable of models to rely on the buy side to have enough kind of in-house expertise to be able to evaluate something that has not passed through a standard that they sort of have to act as the evaluator in that case in some ways. So what do you see as some of these key barriers that are limiting the scaling of carbon markets, maybe specifically related to these sort of new methodologies, and how do you want to see those change, or how must they change?
Yeah, I mean, so you and I have shared a speaker platform on specifically on this subject, haven't we? And there are so many different ways to address this question, but trying to keep it sort of focused around what we're talking about around sort of methodology development and the various processes that sit around that. I think it's important to understand that our kind of starting point it's a proper old school, antiquated, paper-based system with people poring over documents of hundreds of pages, which just takes time. It's subject to human error. There are all these bottlenecks in the current system, which means it's really slow and it's really expensive, and also the quality differs as well, according to who it is that's running their proverbial slide rule over your sort of verification documents. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, and this touches on sort of what I think one of the sort of the missions of Thallo is that there's a huge opportunity to streamline some of the processes that currently underpin the verification, the validation, and the MRV sort of functions of carbon credit generation and carbon project verification, in order to make it much quicker, much more efficient, and much more accessible. And I think that will help significantly with just accelerating scale up of these technologies and the carbon removal sector in general. However, that's all well and good, because it assumes that the technologies that we're talking about, be that enhanced weathering or DAX or BECS or whatever, they're all kind of methodology ready, because it is the case that as these new technologies come sort of onto our radar, not all of them have the science developed to a point where you can use that science to underpin the development of the methodology. And so the challenge there is to provide the right type of funding and the right type of support to get that science up to a point where it can then be transferred into a methodology and be accessible to project developers. And not all technologies are there yet. And again, the latest outputs from the Frontier group, I think, call it verification confidence level, certainly the VCL, and different technologies have different VCLs according to where they are with the science and then all of the uncertainty that surrounds the implementation and measuring.
Great. And I think maybe that's a nice segue into the sort of final couple of questions I want to ask you, which are around there's been a lot of discussion around blockchain technology. And of course, we both work for companies that are using this technology. So can you talk a little bit about what the role of blockchain technology can be in supporting the voluntary carbon markets? What are some of the applications that you're excited about? And then also maybe where it's not the right tool, because I think it's very important to recognize that blockchain technology is just another technology, and sometimes it's the right tool and sometimes it's not. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So the kind of the digitization of the antiquated processes that I referred to earlier on presents a huge opportunity, I think, for blockchain. I mean, just getting it onto a digital platform doesn't necessarily have to be blockchain, but that will just speed up so many of the processes that are currently so slow and expensive in this current kind of system. But then obviously you've got all of the kind of transparency, the so-called democratization of project types, the actual currency itself. You can really sort of dig into the provenance of individual carbon credits, which have their own, is very, very kind of secure data-based information on sort of where the credit has come from and when the carbon removal took place, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the blockchain technology presents sort of a huge opportunity to deliver transparency, efficiency, speed, and therefore scale into projects that are methodology ready and ready to generate credits now, and that's typically sort of ex post credits. I would be fascinated to learn, and I simply just don't know enough about the technology to know how blockchain could be utilized to address those projects that are coming into the market now, but urgently need what we would call a kind of a contribution funding rather than compensation. In other words, we're not buying credits to offset here, but we are contributing funds into project types to get them to the point where they can generate ex post verified credits. And I'd be fascinated to know how blockchain technology can address that challenge, because that is, in my view, equally important, perhaps even more so, to bring these new technologies into the kind of space where they're generating verified ex post carbon credits.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Totally agree. And I think there's a lot of areas where this technology can be the right tool to help to scale up the markets, because that, at the end of the day, is what we're all aiming to do, is to try to get more carbon out of the atmosphere and avoid more carbon going into the atmosphere. So
one thing I would say though, Hayley, is that you and I have experienced this firsthand in talking to customers who are the ultimate sort of end user for these carbon credits, is that I think one of the things that blockchain and organizations like Thallo and ourselves need to be super aware of is the massive knowledge gap that exists at the moment amongst the buyers of carbon credits. And the current system, although antiquated and slow and expensive, is already fiendishly complicated. And so you need entire teams like the teams in Microsoft or Stripe, to get their heads around the current characteristics of the system. Now, introducing blockchain technology into that, while it'll streamline those processes, there's also the danger, I think, that it will introduce new layers of complexity into an already very complex space. And so we just need to be super aware of that and bring the customer along with us, keeping explanations as simple as possible, and maybe not exposing them to so much of the detail such that it can just become very off-putting. At the end of the day, you need to remember it's a voluntary market, and if you just sort of bamboozle customers with too much detail, then they're probably going to do something else.
Yes, definitely agreed. Though on the flip side, there is also an increasing I would say, cadre of companies and individuals that are interested in kind of gaining more understanding and exposure to blockchain. So I do also think there is this sort of expansion of the pie in addition to education that is very much incumbent upon companies like ours to explain how we're using this technology in a way that makes sense and is transparent and straightforward. But I do also think it's an interesting sort of opportunity to entice new actors into the market who are curious and want to know more and want to understand, and having this additional sort of buzzy technology involved is just another invitation, I think, to start to learn more. So I totally take your point, and I think it's a very important one. And also, I think there's some big opportunity there.
So, I don't think it's a game. It's not a showstopper. What I'm trying to say, by any means. It's a challenge. Therefore, it's an opportunity. And as you know, the voluntary carbon market now, you're finding all of these service organisations come pouring into the marketplace. You know, everyone's from communications agencies to lawyers to insurance, etc., And there is a huge opportunity for somebody to step up and provide some good, lucid communications to support both the buy side and the supply side around this very complex space.
Fabulous. Well, maybe we'll leave it there since I think we're about out of time, but thank you so much, Simon. This has been fantastic. And where can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up on any of the questions that you've raised here?
Well, just contact me direct. I'm Simon at Undo. Undo is so un-do.com. So Simon at undo.com.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Not at all. Lovely to speak to you again.